Work Wellness Institute is transforming research into workplace performance and health. As an organization, we function throughout the complete cycle of turning research into practice, mobilizing knowledge as a research institute, community partner, funder, and educational provider. Our mission of creating safe, healthy, and inclusive workplaces for all is our driving motivation. Learning is a lifelong journey to adapt to the forever changing needs of the workplace. Whether you are a leader, a professional, an academic, or a student, we provide high-quality resources that are evidence-based, topical, and relevant to all industries. Choose the Work Wellness Institute as your learning journey partner and become a member to gain full access to our diverse knowledge mobilization programming, including lectures on demand, e-curriculum, 3 distinct certification opportunities, and more. Continue to learn and connect with the Work Wellness Institute and see how we can support transforming research into performance and health for your workplace.
Okay, fantastic. Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are joining us today. We thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and have this wonderful time together on such an important topic. So again, welcome to everyone in joining us on today's webinar, The Role of the Bystander Creating a Harassment-Free Workplace. My name is Elizabeth White, and I am the team lead of learning and development with the Work Wellness Institute, and I'll be here to help host and moderate today's webinar. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I have the privilege to live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. This webinar is made possible through the support of our funders, partners, as well as memberships to the Work Wellness Institute. And we'd like to thank our advisory committees and speakers who contribute to this webinar series. Well, thank you for indulging in that couple of minutes of housekeeping, and I'm more than happy to move into the main event today. So we are very excited to be welcoming Nicole White with us today, who is the project lead of Enough Already and has been for the last 4 years. Enough Already strives to prevent and address sexual harassment in Saskatchewan workplaces. Nicole is an award-winning community organizer, advocate, and builder. She's worked in community for 2 decades, engaging marginalized communities. And in her spare time, she started the nonprofit Moontime Sisters, a menstrual equity group that has sent 2 million products to northern and remote communities. She strives to always put community first, and we are so excited to have her with us today. Thank you so much, Nicole, and I will pass things over to you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction this morning. Welcome, everyone. I am so honored to be joining you this morning. So I've got a bit of a cold, so bear with me if you see me pop a lozenge in my mouth or grab some tea or water. So as Elizabeth mentioned, I'm presenting to you from Treaty 6 territory in the traditional homelands of the Métis. Saskatoon, Saskatchewan is my home, so I'm deeply honored to be chatting with you this morning. So she had alluded to using Mentimeter throughout our session today. So if you haven't already done so, I would encourage you to open up your camera and focus your QR reader on the QR code. And by doing that, you should have a green screen that pops up with this title screen on it. You can do that on your phone. And if you're having difficulty doing that, you can actually open up a window on your computer. And it allows you, if you go to menti.com, menti.com, using Chrome or Google, and then type in that code below there. So 84036017, and it'll allow you to answer questions as we go throughout our session today. And it's so much more meaningful hearing from you, having a live reflection of what your other peers and colleagues are saying on the call here. So some pieces along with that is that I always assume we've got survivors in the room. So let's be really respectful as we're using it as a learning tool together. And please know it is anonymous in nature. So I have no idea who is saying what, and I have no idea who is saying and responding in what way. So right now it looks like we've got 6 folks on Mentimeter. I'm hoping that bumps up a little before we get going. So some pieces around that, if you find that your slides aren't refreshing as quickly as mine is, just refresh your browser and it should catch up. And if at any point you get bumped out of the slideshow, just let me know and I can put this code and everything back up on the screen. If someone's able to put that in the chat box, that would be also really helpful. So I'm going to move ahead. We've got an action-packed time together today. Now, I think I've got a bit of an introductions already done. I'm a registered social worker who's been doing public legal education for the last 4 years. Now, for those of you who are outside Saskatchewan, I want to let you know that there are funded projects in every province and territory across the country. So if you're interested in getting connected with them, just reach out to me and I'm more than happy to get you plugged into your local resource if Saskatchewan and our general vicinity is not your area. There's great people doing similar work, and I really would be happy to provide introductions there. So, who is enough already? We're going to talk a little bit about how harassments impact our workplaces and understanding the role of the employer, as well as bystander intervention training, and then a bit of a Q&A at the end of our session. So that's our time together. And as we have already discussed, we are going to be talking about gender-based violence. So many of us have lived experience in this area. I want you to take good care of yourself as we navigate the subject matter. If you need to mute me, if you need to step out, if you need to revisit the recording at a later date, all of that is taking care of yourself. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I need to talk to somebody, please know my contact information is going to be at the end of the presentation, and I really welcome that call. I want to take good care of you with our time together, and I really want to build that bridge if you want to talk to somebody afterwards. Okay, so to get the
Sorry,
ball rolling,
Nicole.
oh yeah,
Sorry, just before you head in, can you just send the Menti code one more time and I'll get that into the chat?
oh yes, absolutely. It is just right here. Is it showing instructions? There we go.
There we go.
I appreciate
8403617. Okay, that is now in the chat for everyone to see throughout the presentation. Sorry, thank you very much.
Beautiful. No, don't apologize. That's really helpful. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So I always like to do a bit of a softball question so folks kind of get a sense of how Mentimeter works if this isn't something you've used before. So right now we've got 11 folks on Mentimeter. And if everyone said that they were feeling curious, the word cloud would work in such a way that it would just get bigger and bigger. So right now we've got folks feeling eager, curious, excited, all of which are wonderful adjectives to describe how you're feeling today. I was going to say this morning, but I realize not everybody's in morning right now. Wonderful. Learning, good, attentive, tired, eager. Very good. Hey, great. Thank you so much. It's really nice to have a bit of a temperature check as we head into the session. And oh no, we've got somebody already feeling hungry. So I really hope we've got snacks within arm's reach because nobody wants somebody hangry as we're talking about harassment in the workplace. Very good. Thank you so much for that. So enough already. We launched literally a week before the pandemic began. And we are a multi-stakeholder coalition determined to address and prevent workplace harassment in Saskatchewan. Our mission and mandate was around addressing sexual harassment, but we found that when we were talking about it, we really generalized the presentation to address all sorts of harassment and giving people tools and strategies to address not just sexual harassment, but any type of problematic behavior that might pop up in the workplace, whether it's racism, sexism, ageism, all type of things that people might be navigating within workplaces. The partnership behind Enough Already includes the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission, Create Justice Settle Culture Law at the University of Saskatchewan, the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce, Sexual Assault Services of Saskatchewan, and the Saskatoon Industry Education Council. So they really wanted to dig into the research to find out what was actually working to start to create systemic change and creating a culture shift within our workplaces. So we want to increase awareness and create space to talk about something that's hard while providing support and education with the overall goal to really reduce and prevent incidences from happening and really challenging long-established societal attitudes and behaviors while showcasing leading practices. If I'm being honest with you, I think our biggest challenge is really bringing about change in regards to long-established societal attitudes and behaviors, there's been a real normalizing of not particularly great behavior in regards to how we talk to each other in person, online, and in workplaces. So, really challenging that narrative and giving people tools and strategies of what to do when somebody's bringing that type of behavior into the workplace. So, some of this may be a refresher. I always like to have good, solid baseline information so we're all speaking the same language. So, the main types of harassment we discuss are harassment based on prohibited grounds, personal harassment, and sexual harassment. So, these ones are actually specific to our province. Your province or territory might have different prohibited grounds. So, these ones are actually listed in the 2018 Human Rights Code. It is against the law to harass someone based on any of these reasons. And then personal harassment, I think more folks are familiar with this. It may be referred to as bullying and really has major impacts on the psychological safety of a workplace. And that's really what we've been doing in the last few years is connecting this work to psychological safety in the workplace. And when I ask somebody, have you experienced harassment in the workplace? People are like, oh, no, 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 no. Which is why we include examples, because I think a lot of folks need to hear what are examples. And then folks are like, oh, yeah. I may have experienced one of these things throughout my professional career. So it's really recognizing verbal, written abuse or threats, insulting or derogatory, degrading comments, jokes, or gestures, personal ridicule, malicious gossip, unjustifiable interference with work, work sabotage, refusing to work or cooperate with others, and then interference or vandalism of personal property. So again, these definitions might change depending on what region or territory you're living in. So please check out your provincial or territorial human rights commission because they might have a slightly different definition. So for us, sexual harassment includes all of these things. I was surprised when I had to list displaying of offensive pictures and photographs, but after 4 years of doing this work, I can absolutely tell you that it happens a lot in a lot of workplaces throughout our province. So it's just a gentle reminder of all of these things not being appropriate within a workplace setting. So we've talked about what is harassment, what's not harassment is offering constructive feedback, guidance, or advice about work-related behavior and any reasonable action taken by your employer, like managing performance, taking reasonable disciplinary actions, and assigning work. So this isn't something I learned when I was in school. I don't know about you, but it's always really understanding that you may not have intended to harm someone with your words or actions, but you have to be accountable for the impact they had. So just having some grace for ourselves as we do this learning together today. So I've got some true or false for you. Work-related sexual harassment only occurs at work. True or false? If I had gold stars to give it out, I absolutely would. You're absolutely correct. It covers things that happen at work and during work hours. It also covers things that are Teams calls or Zoom calls. So, work video conferencing, any work related social events or conferences that you may attend connected to your employment. Workplace sexual harassment only happens between supervisors and their employees. True or false? I think some folks have a very staunch idea of what harassment looks like and who it entails, which is why we really want to bust these myths out there. But again, you're correct. So it covers harassment by coworkers, supervisors, and employers. It also covers sexual harassment by clients, contractors, and members of the public that arises during the course of that worker's employment. Men can be impacted by sexual harassment. True or false? I think the conversation has been around this has been changing in the last few years, and I think it's long overdue. So you are absolutely correct. So 1 in 3 Canadian women and 1 in 5 Canadian men. So when I talked to a male survivor, he had articulated he knew he wasn't going to be comfortable with the communal lunch space and the conversation happening there. So he started taking meetings. He started going for walks just to avoid that communal space. And that was a coping strategy he had navigated to help maintain a place where he could continue to go to work on a daily basis and still feel safe while actively avoiding the problematic spaces. So we know that everyone can be impacted by sexual harassment. There's also understanding intersectionality and the role of it. So if you sit in any of these vulnerable populations, whether this slide or the next, there are higher rates of sexual harassment in the workplace. So research shows that young people entering or preparing to enter the workforce, if you experience sexual harassment in your first job, you normalize that behavior and expect it in future jobs. And we absolutely do not want to be normalizing this type of thing. And if you're a woman in any of these fields, so STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And that's definitely something we navigate and hear from survivors every single day. Now that we talked about what is harassment, what it looks like, have you or someone you know experienced harassment in the workplace within the last year? This is a slightly harder question, so I understand the vulnerability attached to it. Wow, okay. Very interesting. So we've got 40% saying, yes, I've absolutely experienced it or know someone who has in the last year, followed by 31% saying, you know what, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's something that me or my peers have experienced, followed by 25% saying, no, that's not been my experience. Why we ask this question is that for the first time ever, we started partnering with a research lab at the university to really start to create formalized research around this area for the first time ever. And this is very interesting because I was in a training just yesterday that found that 97% of the people in that training had experienced harassment within the last year. So for folks on the call today who are on Mentimeter, we've got 44% saying, yes, I've experienced it. So I want to thank you very much for participating in that one because I think that's really powerful. So the formal research finds that 40% of Saskatchewan residents have been harassed or know someone who has, and that's almost double national numbers. So we know we have a major issue around harassment in our workplaces, which is why I'm deeply appreciative of the work that we've been doing these last few years. 71% of Saskatchewan residents say they have limited knowledge of what to do when they witness harassment, which is why we built this training as we have. What is harassment? So you can actually identify it when it's happening. What are tools and strategies to address and prevent it? But then also, how do you be a good support to your colleague? What are those supports available if you've been harmed in the workplace? Because this is really what this is. It is a workplace injury. So Stats Canada issued some numbers last summer that found that 32% of women and 26% of men had not received any information from their employer on how to report sexual harassment and sexual assault. So it's really being cognizant of if you're your HR lead in your organization, just do a refresher. Remind folks where the HR policy or the manual is, where the policy is accessible, and who they can talk to if they experience something in the workplace. Different industries have different rates of impact. Obviously, there are a lot more industries than we have included here today, but it's just a bit of a sampling so you get a sense of what the experience has been for Canadian workers. 47% of our two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer workers experience inappropriate sexualized behavior and discrimination. And I think that's the thing to remember, that when you're harmed at work, that stuff doesn't stay at work. It comes home with you and impacts all facets of your life. So really understanding that ripple effect. So we know that the majority of people are not going to formally report. So one thing I want to take note of, you may see the term victim in here. Sometimes you'll hear me use survivor. Sometimes you'll hear impacted person, or sometimes people have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. That one does not roll off the tongue that well. But all of these are interchangeable because not everybody identifies as a victim. Not everybody identifies as a survivor. Recognizing that, we know that the majority of people do not formally report and they choose to deal with it in isolation with the assistance of friends or coworkers. And if it gets bad enough, leaving the organization. And those professional consequences are real. And it makes sense if you're being harmed at work, you're not going to give 110%. Health impacts ranges for the person, increased rates of anxiety, depression, all the way to complex PTSD, which can be a debilitating lifelong injury to navigate. And it doesn't just impact the person who experienced the harassment, it's also understanding the people around it who witnessed it, who saw it happen. So inaction by the employer to deal with situations of harassment can lead to decreased job satisfaction, a very valid fear of becoming the next target, and a concern of lack of fairness. And for the business overall, if you're looking at why this is an important conversation to have, there's a very solid research about a model of prevention and doing this deeper work before something happens, creating that space to talk about it, prioritizing the safety of your employees, letting them hear it from you that we prioritize your safety if you're experiencing something. That is something really powerful for an organization to just hear from their leadership, and really understanding there's a financial cost to navigating sexual harassment if not navigated appropriately. I'm sure we can all think of a business or two, or corporation or organization who has not handled sexual harassment in a great way and have been in the news as a result of it. I briefly wanted to talk about the role of the employer. So you are legally responsible for creating a safe and healthy, respectful workplace, free from harassment and related retaliation, and you are responsible for the actions of a management and supervisory personnel. And if you're wondering where to get started, um, take a look at your policy. How long has it been since been updated? If anyone isn't sure where to get started, we actually have a template policy that you can download off of our website at enoughalreadysk.ca. And that's if you want to just get that conversation started, that's someplace, and doing deep training for your employees while providing that training and with prompt incident investigation, and call somebody if you need help. We know that conflict resolution isn't always everyone's skill set. Not everybody has an HR manager. Not everybody has an HR department. So really understanding sometimes it's skill building that needs to have happen. And, team charters is a really great concept to consider. And that's space to sort of talk to your team. What do you want this workplace to look like? What does respect look like? How do we support each other in the development of a safe and healthy workplace? So just a quick question, when was the last time you updated your anti-harassment policy? And if you're like, within the last 20 years, there can't be an organization that hasn't updated theirs in the last 20 years. I absolutely have worked within an organization in the last 3 months that their last update to their policy happened in 2002. So, yeah. So we've got the folks within the last 5 years, which is great. I don't know. Okay, so that's your shoulder tap to check that out after we get off the call today. And then within the last 10 years is 7%. So sometimes there have been updates to your human rights code. So you might want to just check, see where it's at, see if there's any updates that need to have happen. I always like to include this because this hasn't happened in a lot of jurisdictions in the country yet. So January 2022, the Saskatchewan government had updated the definition of a worker to include volunteers, students, and contractors. So really making sure you've got your fingers on the pulse of what's going on throughout your province, and really making sure your policies really reflect any legislative updates that may have happened in the last few years. So really understanding the benefit of being proactive and creating space and role modeling absolutely matters. And it is really your job to maintain your pulse on your organization and support and encourage early resolution of conflict. So when left unaddressed, workplace conflict can often result in absenteeism, turnover, harassment complaints, reduced productivity, lower morale, or all of the above. I mildly felt like who's that guy on Jeopardy? Anyways, Alex Trebek. I felt a little like Alex Trebek when I was reading out those options there. Yeah, you got it. That is absolutely one of the all of the above responses. It can impact you in so many ways. So when conflict escalates and goes on without resolution, it can become distracting and costly to the organization. I think sometimes everybody might know that an investigation is happening, and then the investigation will be concluded, and then people will be like, okay, back to work, and really understanding the role of restoration. So sometimes restoration could be a training piece, or could be hey, that something has occurred. Let's make sure and talk about this. Are we all on the same page when it comes to a safe and respectful workplace? I'm sure you've seen this in conflict resolution training. I think it's solid information and a solid reminder. All conflict is rooted in unmet needs, misinterpretation, and miscommunication. And if left unchallenged, it goes and moves up that cycle and spiral and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, moving into assumptions, camps, lateral violence, and toxic culture, absenteeism, turnover, harassment complaints. So an example of a camp might be, say, me and my colleague are beefing, and I start bringing my colleagues and friends behind me. They start bringing their colleagues behind them, and we've effectively divided your work team. So that's the example of camps. So if you are walking away from a conversation and it's not sitting right with you, I really encourage you to circle back to that person and just sort of say, use clarifying language. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. I want to make sure I understand your expectations of me, that type of thing. Anytime you can stop yourself from moving up that cycle, you're doing the deeper work in creating a healthier, more respectful workplace. And honestly, these skills are not just helpful in the workplace. I mean, this would be really great skills to have around your family Thanksgiving table, right? Like these are great skills every single day. Excuse me. I think we've kind of talked about this one already. Imagine what we could put that money towards if we weren't spending it on investigations, which is again why we want to prioritize investigation and being preventative. So sorry, hold on a second. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so research shows if you're willing to speak up, maybe others will too, and creating space to let your colleagues know that there are tools and strategies of what to do when you see harassment happening. This bystander intervention has been a really meaningful way to start to create that space. Our session, as you can see, is all focused on empowering you with tools and options and resources, not heavy-handed. Tone is important. So everyone, I was doing so well there. There are valid reasons why people don't speak up, and that's totally understandable. It's also really important for you to know as a manager, if somebody's scared of being punished or scared of retaliation, there are some other conversations you need to have with your team so they know that you're a safe person to come talk to. And just having some grace for ourselves, because as we know, the majority of us have lived experience in this area. Maybe you haven't been the best employer or leader as you've navigated things, but really knowing that you're starting today by coming to this training and figuring out how you can incorporate these types of conversations within your workspace every day. So I kind of like to refer to this as like a bystander buffet. You know, when you go to a buffet, you don't choose all the options. You figure out what are the strategies that might work best for you, because every conflict is different. It involves different people, different power dynamics, different communication styles, different egos, right? So as we navigate through the options, if you're like, no, I'd never, that's okay. I want you to just keep listening, and I want you to figure out some strategies that work best for you. Okay. Always remembering safety and really understanding if there's someone better suited to address the situation, it's really okay to go get help. Now, intervention, I think this is where a lot of folks go when it comes to bystander intervention. This is when you step in and address the person doing the harassment, be firm, let them know that their behavior is not okay. And I think a lot of folks get scared about what that looks like. And I don't know about you, but before I did this work, I would, if somebody was saying something to me that I wasn't particularly happy with or comfortable with, I'd probably just be shocked into silence. And then like a week and a half later, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh, this is what I should have said to them. So recognizing that I'm probably not alone in that experience, we like to include prompts and suggestions for that. So it could be quite simply like, no, that's not okay. Let's get back to work. Leave them alone. Stop talking about that. It's offensive. Enough already. There was a research study that explored how to shut down homophobic behavior that found that that phrase, "Hey, that's not cool," is the most effective. So really understanding that there's all sorts of things you could do in that situation. If you're in leadership, please don't walk away. Your team needs to see you address harassment when you see it happening. And it's also understanding the role of laughter. Sometimes somebody's super uncomfortable and just waiting for someone to change the subject. So distract. This is when you create a distraction, asking a completely unrelated question, focusing on the person who's experiencing the harassment. There's a phone call for you. Someone's looking for you. I'm going to go for a coffee. Want to come join me? Pull them out of that situation. And that's not combative at all. You're not getting in somebody's face. You're prioritizing somebody's safety. I'm keeping the T close just in case. Sometimes you need to find help, and that's okay too. And the next piece is probably the most important, is supporting somebody after the fact. Sometimes people get stuck of what they can say and what's helpful. And sorry, it's really about saying, I'm so sorry that happened to you. How can I help? I have your back. And really documenting is very, very important. Even if somebody doesn't want to file a complaint in the moment, I still want you to document what you saw, heard, witnessed. Time, date, location, everyone present, the more detail, the better. Really creating a fulsome picture of what you witnessed and what occurred, because harassment tends to escalate. And maybe 6 months from now, somebody says, okay, I want to go talk to our supervisor. And you can say, remember what happened in September? I have it documented. Let's help put that in with your complaint to help substantiate what you've been experiencing these last 6 months. So that's a really powerful thing you can do to help support your colleague. So the buffet includes all those options there. Absolutely. Language matters and words most definitely have meaning. Those bystander interventions again. Now, do you think there's at least one thing you could do if you witness harassment happening? I don't know what it is about dancing blue dots on the screen, but it really makes me happy because I think frequently people feel powerless in regards to what they can do in situations. And I'm deeply appreciative of the folks on Mentimeter. And I want to thank everyone for having patience with me as we navigated this summer cold. Wonderful. So we've got folks saying, yeah, there is at least one thing I could do if I witness harassment happening. So all of our work is connected to evaluation. So we are connected to the Canadian Hub for Applied and Social Research. Some of the longitudinal research shows that within our training, we have employers reporting there's a greater sense of confidence in speaking to management about workplace injury and increased rates of people speaking up. Now, when people speak up, it doesn't mean it turns into a formalized complaint. Sometimes you're just speaking up and you're shutting it down in the moment, right? So you're actually sometimes stopping escalation in the tracks when you see people feeling empowered. Now, I also like to get information out there. So there are programs like this across the country where if somebody's experienced harassment, they can actually speak to legal support for free. And in Saskatchewan, we've got the SHIFT project through PLE, Public Legal Education Association, where you can receive it 4 hours of free legal advice. We also try to connect people to counseling support, recognizing that not everybody has EFAP, not everybody has positive experiences with EFAP, and understanding that sexual harassment still sits under the purview of gender-based violence. Our website is a great place to start. If you have questions, or if you want to speak further, or if you want to get plugged into the organization who's doing similar work in your province or territory, just shoot me an email. I'd love to chat with you. These can all typically run about 60 minutes in time, usually are done in person or remotely, hopefully with a fully functional facilitator. And we also talk to people about their other options. If internal experiences aren't great, reach out to Occupational Health and Safety or the Human Rights Commission. So what was your biggest takeaway this morning? The one piece I typically talk about that we didn't have time, did not allow it for, we also do a section around microaggressions and lateral violence, because sometimes people will be like, oh, I don't feel like I need to do some work around sexual harassment, but microaggressions and lateral violence is tricky. And I think a lot of folks need more space to talk about it because it's behavior that a lot of us experience, but aren't always sure how to label it and that type of thing. Just waiting. Okay, so we've got a buffet. I can make a difference and face the fact. Resources. Sharing of interventions, but would have liked more reference to prevention versus reacting to it. Okay. Value in referring anti-harassment. Reinforce the way I've been teaching my kids about interacting with kids. Oh my gosh, I wish we could get this in all schools, right? Start early. Very good. So for the person who's looking for preventative work, I would definitely encourage them to spend some more time within the roles of the employer piece, because it walks through some strategies that you can do, but also recognizing that this training is actually part of the prevention part. It can be really helpful. I'm gonna mute, but I ask folks to take a second to open up that QR code. I recognize that we've got some folks in the chat and there's questions. So is there folks from, as Elizabeth, is there any questions that we can discuss or talk about?
Yes, as I'm taking that 1 second to take myself off of mute and on camera. Thank you so much, Nicole. I'll start there with just an appreciation for yourself and all of the expertise that you've brought forward today. We do have quite a bit of time left for Q&A at this time. So just as a reminder to everyone on screen, we do have the option to send a chat message through, or if you want to use the Q&A function specifically, you're more than welcome to use that function. And so just starting off, looking at vulnerable populations and going back to that slide, and just someone wanting to kind of bring forward and maybe gain your thoughts around including children in that, and maybe those are children of employees themselves or of in the workplace, or children that also fall into these more vulnerable populations, or children of those that fall into those populations, and just any thoughts on that, or where that might fit into this pie, if you will.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, I think we included youth under the protective fields within the Human Rights Code, but yeah, it's not listed under vulnerable populations. And you're absolutely right. Would be a really good thing to consider adding. So thank you for whoever suggested that.
You called out kind of an EAP or whatever kind of acronym that might be utilized depending on the province, and just having someone that's also kind of relating to that not being the best of experiences and isn't kind of a solve all. So just maybe wanted to bring an opportunity. I know you mentioned a few, but brings an opportunity around resources, as I do think EAP may be if you will, a go-to, as it is something that quite a lot of employers might be offering out, but to just expand what could be offered outside of an EAP.
Oh, yes. So I definitely consider looking within your community or organization. Where is your sexual assault center and their contact? Really creating a fulsome resource within your community. What are the other resources that would be helpful for a survivor that you connect with within your organization? Is there something like Shift where people can speak to a lawyer, and really being transparent about their options? I think sometimes folks just feel disempowered, or it doesn't come up that often, and then you're like just trying to do your best in the moment. So that's another space to consider reaching out to other funded projects like ours, because we absolutely do know the resources within the community. I don't know. So I have heard from a few survivors that sometimes the experience with EFAP hasn't been great. So, okay, I really appreciate you advocating for yourself in that way. Let's find you another place that is a really great resource for you. So, as for if anybody's done counseling, sometimes it takes time to find the right one. So, really honoring that process to help support somebody on their healing journey is really quite important.
Okay, great, thank you. And always opening that conversation of what is helpful for you, right? And looking a little bit more at individualized versus kind of an oversweeping, this is what can be
Mhm.
helpful. I know that you mentioned, we just have a curiosity, that you did have to, cut down a little bit around that microaggression and those kinds of topic areas. Not to kind of put it back into play, but just a question: is there something that you'd like to say around that, or could expand, as it's just a point of curiosity to one of our audience members here?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. So I think more folks are familiar with lateral violence, and that you spend more time sort of talking about how lateral violence pops up in a workplace. And then around microaggressions, there's a really great resource on YouTube that we typically show. It's like if you Google microaggressions as mosquito bites, and if you look for a video that's about a minute and a half, there is one that has expletives. So be cognizant, that's not the one I'm suggesting, the shorter one, but it just sort of looks at how microaggressions pop up in a workplace. An example of a microaggression might be, "Oh, your name is too hard to pronounce. I'm just gonna call you Mike." So that opportunity where you dismiss somebody's cultural heritage, you dismiss that important cultural name that somebody was given by their family, and just give them an anglicized name that's more convenient or comfortable for you. Um, Taking the time to get to know your new colleague and asking questions. Tell me a little bit more about that. I may screw up the pronunciation a few times. Just be patient with me. Even just having that space, those are signs of respect that you're wanting to do to take the time to get to know your new colleague.
Thank you so much for that expansion and providing some examples that you might not think are harmful, but can be,
Mm.
in a space. I'll just take a moment to answer, just a couple questions around materials and things like that that have come in. So, yes, if there is any additional, links or the resources that were shared through the materials, they will be sent through to registrants today. And certainly, if there's anything that's additional, that Nicole might be thinking of as we're having this discussion, any additional links or things like that, we'll make sure that it's sent out in the post communications package, once we, have closed today's session. So no worries on that front. To bring it back a little bit more to the subject matter at hand today, and a little bit where we started, of one of those myths around gendered, differences, and it can, potential thoughts out there of it can only happen to women. So as we know, it does not only happen to women; men are as affected as well. So wanting to dive into that a little bit, and how do we cultivate an environment where men do feel more comfortable coming forward, whether that's, formal or perhaps informal, to kind of create that comfortability. Whereas, as kind of mentioned, we do live in a society that may skew a bit to wanting to brush it off, or those kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, I think it can be a part of a training like this, even just having a Q&A, just honoring the fact that just saying it out loud, the men are absolutely impacted. Um, I don't I think there's some deeper work we need to do in regards to supporting our male survivors. But recognize the importance of an overall general training like this can be a good place to start the conversation. If you have a particular department that's just having turnover, 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 sometimes people are like, "Oh, it's a really hard job. That's why we're constantly having turnover." That might not always be the case. You might actually have somebody there who is really poisonous in their behavior and might be causing issues. So just doing some deeper questions, doing some deeper learning in regards to your organization. If you find you're constantly having to hire for a particular position, why is that? And what we can do to better support people. Oh, and Bonnie's put a resource out in the chat. Thank you so much, Bonnie.
Just
That's
saw
so
that.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I definitely think that work around that is changing, but gosh, we've got some real challenges to support men in regards to coming forward. And this is just, again, I think sort of the catalyst. It's the first step of a conversation, is cracking the door open to the conversation. And we as a third party are really happy to do that, because I think frequently an organization just doesn't know how to get started, and they feel kind of uncomfortable, and maybe there's somebody who's defensive in the room. But really understanding the tone of how we've created the organization and focusing on empowering your team is really important. And we've done a lot of work to do something that is positive and engaging.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just a bit of a follow-up on that, through the evaluations or the experiences that you've had within this project over these years, just particularly from the male perspective, has there been any intervention or strategy that's come up as something that's most helpful for them, or is it a bit scattered depending again on individual experience?
Ooh, yeah, I would say individual and different individual experience. I mean, there's so many different work environments that we navigate that are particularly not the healthiest. So like addressing workplace culture is absolutely a part of doing this deeper work, because if this type of stuff has gone on and been allowed to happen, it becomes normalized, and everyone in that environment has developed a tolerance to it, because like, oh, that's just the way it is. And it doesn't have to be like that. Every single day you come into a workplace, you could be raising a bar and build something better for your team now and your team to come. Because it's really important that we are growing with the times, especially in 2023. Our work environment has changed so dramatically in the last few years, and really making sure that you're not being left behind. And taking this and really running with it can make you an organization that people are looking towards, if you're really leading the way in workplace safety and prioritizing the safety and wellness of your team. That people talk, and they want to go to a place that prioritizes safety, and they want to go to a place that treats them well. And if you're looking for to strengthen your organization, I absolutely think this is a vital part of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a great point. And if we can go to that for a moment around the disruptive times that we've been in, and maybe speak to, as you mentioned, this project started just kind of right at the tip of the pandemic. And so did the work change, or the situation change in this kind of harassment space going into the pandemic, or maybe even different than what you had anticipated, kind of coming
Mhm.
into a pre-pandemic lens of what the work
Yeah.
might be, and then kind of the reality of the last few disruptive years?
For sure. So from my experience within the province, I'm deeply appreciative of our coalition members, because we had great connections with our chamber, and the chamber was like, we just have employers that are just trying to survive this, right? So there was sometimes it really depended on the employer, because some employers are like, I don't know how to engage my team right now. Yeah, let's bring in some training. I want to have them having lots of tools as they come back to work, right? So it really depended on the organization. For us internally, it was great, because it really prioritized everyone going online for training, and it allows us to introduce Mentimeter and see the value in regards to sort of reflecting back from the audience what we're hearing. It allowed survivors to speak up honestly in a safe way, and just the introduction of that was a really meaningful tool. I also found from employers so different experiences. So we had, because there was a precarious nature to some employment, I heard from some survivors that, I'm not going to say anything. I just need the job. I need to keep bills. I need bills to be paid to make sure our family is safe. And then we also had situations where there were some communities in northern where there wasn't enough employees to keep restaurants open. So restaurants weren't opening until noon. So that demographic, they were like, yes, let's bring in this training, because if I've got to compete so fiercely for employees, I want to do the work so people want to come to me. So it really depends on the industry, depends on the environment. We also heard situations of higher rates of harassment happening in Zoom, and they were sometimes trickier to navigate, because if this was new at one point in time, and how do folks there's a lot of survivors who are like, I don't, maybe it wasn't harassment. Like there's like survivors sometimes gaslighting ourselves of like, oh, I don't think that was harassment. Just like sort of brushing it aside because they're just not sure how to label it. So um it was complex. It was a complex time. It was a complex time, Elizabeth.
That's a good summary sentence, isn't it? It's a complex time, and in so many ways, and I think we continue to see that duality of where it has soared some conversations in a great way, and then also created, maybe some negativity in others, and just constantly kind of being aware of that duality and seeing where we can strive a bit more on the positive side of things.
Yeah.
A quick question here of someone wanting to know the relativity of the training and see if it's still a tool that is good in the 2023. Universal communication is something that was that they had training in before, and is that still a training that is applicable? Is it used? And if you're not sure, we can always kind of come back to that in that post communications.
I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with that. So I don't
Okay.
think I can answer that question. I'm so sorry.
No, not a problem at all. Um, and,
I saw one
um,
question about unions
yes,
and
I did
like,
just see that as
is
well.
that
But you go
okay?
ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm really proud to partner with a number of unions within our province. And that is again a part of that legwork and partnership building, because I think a lot of my job is for people to feel we were trust building. Some folks were like, enough already. What is this organization? Already just like a little defensive by our name. So we
Mm.
absolutely had to do a lot of outreach and a lot of initial meetings. And so folks knew that we could customize the workshop. You would see the content ahead of time. We could customize it to your audience, to your team. If we have less issues around sexual harassment, maybe we need to talk about more around microaggressions and racism that might pop up. So really understanding that they could customize it to meet the needs of their department within their organization. I think that was really important. So circling back to the union question, absolutely. So within our province, we partnered with the Saskatchewan Federation of Labor, with PSAC, with CUPE, with SEIU West, a number of labor organizations. And it absolutely requires a lot of legwork to start those relationships, because sometimes people will see our coalition members and be like, oh, I don't know if we're gonna like each other. But we've absolutely made some really great bridges between labor and this training being available. So if I could just follow up, if you're a part of a larger organization, one of the pieces we do before doing larger rollout within an urban municipality, let's say. So we would typically do a presentation to leadership, to your HR department, where they've got a closed space where they can ask what are the things that they're afraid of that they wouldn't ask in front of their team. And then we could look at doing a labor connection. So actually asking your labor partners to the table so they can ask any questions that might pop up. And then developing customized training for both your leadership and employees. That's kind of the mission and mandate, because I think there's different messages that need to go out to different audiences. So that's kind of what we do within our project.
Thank you so much for offering that, and hopefully this inspires others to kind of take this baton today of this
Yeah.
training and see where it can take them in future. And kind of in that training realm, we have an audience question around trauma informed training. So that's a word, maybe a package of words that's coming out more and more. And wondering if you might be able to allude to what does that mean? What's the difference of having a trauma informed session over, a regular, if you will, sexual harassment session, just to speak to that as well.
Yes. So there's a reason why I'm a social worker and doing this work, right? We've been really strategic in regards to how we talk about this, because we want survivors to be well taken care of. I think that we do have different sessions around like trauma informed disclosures in a workplace. And then within a general workshops, we actually talk about, if your colleague discloses to you, what are helpful things to say? What aren't helpful things to say? An example of that might be, you know, if a colleague discloses to you And then you respond with, oh, you think that's bad. Something way worse happened to me. And then you start talking about what your experience is. And that happens a lot. So instead of taking the space and making it about you, not to belittle your experience, but really holding space for that person who's just disclosed to you, you really want to focus on your support role. So even just sort of talking about those preliminary skill building pieces that we can do to help support colleagues be better colleagues to others, can be a really powerful conversation to have.
Thank you so much for that. And within the individual experience, a couple of things that have come up quite a bit that I'd love to kind of talk about more is one, that normalized behavior. So if you're the individual and you're kind of getting into that space of normalizing a behavior, how can you maybe get yourself out of that fog or check yourself? Oh, wait, no, this isn't okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, oof, it is really hard to counter that if you find that it has been normalized within your institution. I think that's where those workplace charters can be a really valuable piece to sort of shift how we support each other. But there's always going to be somebody, if you are doing that workplace charter work, there's always going to be somebody 2 weeks after challenging it. And then you have to
Mm.
feel empowered as a team to say, no, we don't actually treat each other like that. Or no, that's not okay. That's not what we agreed upon. So really being ready for those folks who, after you've done some of that internal work, really be ready for the challenges. Because a lot of folks are like, I've been here for years. This is always the way it's been. Um,
Right.
and shifting that can be a slow, painful process. I'm not going to mince words. It's not easy work. If you're navigating really profound lateral violence, it's very hard to shift the climate if that's what folks are used to.
Yeah, it's really holding to the accountability that you agreed to as a
Mm,
team. And it's a tough job, especially if you feel individual in it. So hopefully you strengthen numbers a little bit on that,
yeah.
hopefully.
Oh, that's a really great. Yeah, I agree,
Yeah.
Alyssa.
I did see another resource just popped into the chat from one of our attendees. So thank you for continuously adding to our resource pool from the audience perspective. I see we're actually just at about time. We have about a minute left. And so what I would love to do is end with this question, around employers. We've talked a lot about it today around perhaps maybe you haven't looked at this in a long time, or you don't out of fear of doing it wrong, or those types of barriers. So for all those on today, Nicole, where would you just ask everyone to just start, just to get that, one step in front of the other?
Okay. So yes. So one of my first nudges was to revisit your policy. How long has it been since it's been renewed? But then once you get your team together, talk about the policy. And even just creating space to say, hey, did you know this is the person? Who do you speak to if you experience harm? There's, again, really reiterating what I said. There's real power when people hear from their managers. I I prioritize your safety. If you're not doing well, I want to hear about it because that really matters to me. And just thinking about how you can start to have that conversation with your team.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank everyone here for making the space for this conversation today, allocating very precious time. I know time is a valuable resource, so I appreciate from the audience as well as you, Nicole, for coming together and being active participants in this conversation. So thank you so very much for that today.
Continue to learn and connect with the Work Wellness Institute and see how we're transforming research into workplace performance and health at www.workwellnessinstitute.org.